Europe in the 14th and 15th century. The 14th and 15th centuries were difficult ones in European history. The demographic growth and prosperity that had characterized the High Middle Ages gave way to plague, famine, social upheaval, and rampant welfare, which altogether altered the structure of European society. The High Middle Ages had been a time of growth and prosperity. New agricultural techniques had caused a dramatic rise in population, leading to rising demand for food and fuel, which, in turn, generated inflation and a strain on the environment. As the boundaries of productive land reached their limits during the last decades of the 13th century, agricultural production in numerous areas declined significantly. Aggravating these problems was the change of climate on the eve of the 14th century. Winters and summers became colder and wetter than usual, resulting in floods and early frosts. Consequently, a series of crop failures occurred at the beginning of the century, followed by a widespread famine from 1315 through 1317. The worst of the Middle Ages, the Black Death, also struck Europe in about 1347, and returned periodically for much of the next 100 years. The contagion is believed to have originated in Central Asia, moved westward along the Silk Route, and was pushed to the Black Sea by Mongol horsemen. There are few precise figures for the number of deaths. Contemporary chronologers gave graphic descriptions of heaps of dead bodies piled in public areas and generally agreed that from 1/3 to 1/2 of Europe died of the plague and its recurrences. The dramatic loss of population affected the European economy. As a result of the labor shortage, workers and peasants demanded higher wages for their labor, to which nobles and guildmasters strongly opposed. Moreover, demographic crisis and the economic change occurred against a backdrop of warfare. The most famous war of the era was the 100 Years' War, which was fought between England and France in episodic fashion from 1337 until 1453. As the Black Death had severely depleted the tax base of the medieval state, kings began to raise taxes drastically to meet the expensive coming from the chronic warfare of the age. Frustration from their thwarted demands and much heavier tax burden triggered a series of urban and peasant revolts across Europe. The turmoil of the later Middle Ages did not affect everyone equally. Inflation cut increasingly into the noble's wealth, since it was based on the land with a more static value. Moreover, the huge population loss in the cities caused a virtual collapse of the urban grain markets. This especially hurt the nobles and clergy whose income relied on selling surplus grain in the towns. As both nobles and clergy restored to selling their freedom to their serfs for the purpose of making up this lost income, many peasants bought their freedom and even owned their land. The greater incentive provided by working for themselves rather than their lords led to greater agricultural production and the revival of Europe's population. As a result, the turmoil in the later Middle Ages was largely subsided by 1450, and Europe's population rose from an estimated 50 million in 1450 to 70 million by 1500. This revival had two main effects. The first effect was the establishment of a new economic system, capitalism. As more and more peasants secured their freedom, the consumer market shifted from a few rich nobles to a large number of people. each with modest amounts of cash. Since the guilds, which mainly provided expensive goods to nobles before, refused to adapt to this market, rich merchants established cottage industries and sold their goods outside of the guild's jurisdiction. The profits they made, and the absence of the guild's restrictive regulations, helped these merchants establish the new economic system, capitalism. Secondly, the expanding internal markets prompted Spanish and Portuguese explorers to search for faster, safer trade routes to the sources of spices in the Indies, avoiding dangerous waters and marauding pirates. Most famous among them is Christopher Columbus, whose 4 voyages not only resulted in the discovery of nowadays Cape of Good Hope, but also initiated the European exploration and colonization of the American continents.